Beyond Reason Radio.
Well, if you missed me, I was just on a couple of hours ago, but if you missed me and wanted more of me, you got me, because it's Friday night, it's 8 p.m., and that means we're going to do another edition of Beyond Reason Radio. That might be Beyond Reason in itself, to have another hour of Yaffee.
I was thinking we have nowhere else to go, so here we are.
That's why you're laughing. You're basically saying I have no life. Is what...
Well, I include myself here, too.
Oh, okay. I mean, so we both have no life. Well, that's okay. I mean, the girlfriend's probably listening, no, so that's good. Hello, if you're listening. I'm going to hang out with her tomorrow. I don't abandon her. But yes, we're doing another edition of Beyond Reason. We're on till 9 p.m. tonight right here on News Radio 93.1 WFLA. Of course, if you want to catch the podcast of the show, catch a podcast anywhere podcasts are available. We're also on Facebook Live as well. I wanted to do a show tonight because there's a specific topic I had in my head. It has to do with the news of the week and really the news of the past year in terms of the Democratic Party. The question kind of came to me, though, earlier this week. I played a little bit of this on PM Orlando. I'm going to play more of it here. Economist Thomas Sowell, who, by the way, I would recommend reading his books. I've read like 3 of them. He has 30 of them. He used to write a column all the time. I mean, I haven't read all 30, but I've read 3 of them. Really, really brilliant guy. But he was on Fox Business earlier this week, and he was kind of asked about where the Democrat Party is going, why, they're going more socialist. And what do you think about the future of the country? Are we destined for a socialist future? His answer was not really what I wanted to hear. Did not make me feel comfortable. Let's put it that way. But this is what he said.
The future of America. I mean, do you think that we are destined to go through a period of socialism, a period where these ideas that have not worked, no matter where they've been tried, and certainly wouldn't work here, will be tried here and could bring down our country?
Well, the predictions of economists do not encourage me to go far in that direction. But I do have a great fear that in the long run we may not make it, and I hate to say that, but. And the one thing that keeps me from being despairing is of course, we don't know. There's so many things we can't possibly know, and so we may make it, but I wouldn't bet on it.
Oh, that's a great way to put you in the weekend, right? We may not make it. One of the top economists of the past 30 years is basically saying, we have a good chance we're going to become socialist. Oh, that makes you feel good. Well, the show is called Beyond Reason. By the way, I'm your voice of reason, Michael Yaffee, in a world that is beyond reason. But the show is called Beyond Reason. And Tom Benson is here producing. Tom, how are you, first off?
I'm fine. I'm usually without reason.
Okay, I like that. So there might be a future show coming to WFLA called Without Reason, hosted by Tom Benson. How does that make you feel when Soul says that?
Well, he certainly has more knowledge in this arena than I certainly do, but I remain hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, there was some times where he said he remains hopeful, like he said there, because you don't exactly know what's going to happen. But he was basically talking about the Democrat Party, and this is something that's been a topic on my show, the morning show, any conservative talk show. And that's how left the Democrat Party is going. Now, the biggest example of this really is Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders ran for president, last time against Hillary Clinton in the primary. And I remember thinking at the time, this is a democratic socialist. A lot of people said the guy has no chance. He is way too radical for the Democrat Party. And all of a sudden he comes along and he almost beats Hillary. In fact, some people think he should have. It's just it was rigged.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's other reasons for that. He was an outsider. But just fast forward a couple of years, you look at the Democrat Party today, it seems like what used to be radical, what used to be extreme, the Democrat Party, like Bernie Sanders, all of a sudden, that's what a lot of the party is going for. All of a sudden, he's kind of dictating policy for the party. And then you have the freshmen, up-and-comers like AOC, or I like to call her and you have Ilhan Omar. You have some of these freshmen, really radical Democrats coming up, proposing things like the Green New Deal. You have Elizabeth Warren, who just came out with a proposal today to break up the big tech companies. She has another proposal where a certain amount of the boards and companies would be run by the employees.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
You know, of course, that's all regulated by the government. She wants universal health care, universal child care. All of these things, all of a sudden, this is mainstream. And I started thinking to myself, what happened? What happened in the past 5-10 years that all of a sudden the Democrat Party has gone to the left and it's okay? And a lot of the Democrat base seems to go along with it, seems to want it, even though capitalism has given them the best lives they could have ever hoped for. We live in one of the greatest, most prosperous countries in the world in human history because of capitalism. And yet now they're going more to the left. So I was thinking of it, and I was thinking, okay, there really is a few different reasons why this has happened to the Democrat Party and really to the country as a whole, and why a lot of young people are buying into this ideology of what they call democratic socialism. But honestly, what a lot of things Bernie Sanders is proposing in AOC is beyond just democratic socialism like they have in the Nordic countries. It's way beyond that. It's almost full-fledged socialism. It's right on that edge, if anything. And I realize it's because, and I'm not going to be able to go through all the reasons. There could be 10 different reasons. One is the university system. I'm not going to really get into that. But I think it's because there have been some big lies promoted by the left in the past, most of my life, the past 30 years, that have gained traction, that have convinced enough people that we have to go to a more big government socialist route. There's 4 big lies. I thought there was going to be 3, but there's actually 4 big lies that have happened, especially in the past 10 to 15 years. I'll go through them real quick, and then we're going to go through each one in detail because I think it's really important. Because we have to debunk this. I should have grabbed this audio. But Larry Kudlow, gave a speech at CPAC last week. And he says, we need to put socialism on trial. We need to put it on trial, and we need to convict people, and we need to convict socialism and condemn it. Mm-hmm. So I took him at his word. I like Larry Kudlow. I'm going to do that tonight. And we're going to go through democratic socialism a little bit here on Beyond Reason Radio. But the big lies are this. The first big lie is that the capitalist free market system and evil Wall Street people caused the financial crisis of 2007 and 8. That's what Democrats say all the time, that it was too deregulation, evil Wall Street people, and too much of a free market that caused the Great Recession. That's the first big lie. And I think that we're going to go through that first because I think that's what spurred a lot of people in my generation because they kind of grew up with that and they've been told that over and over. That goes to socialism. That's the first big lie. The second big lie is that Nordic socialism works so much better than what we have, so we must go down that road. And actually, in line with that, the other lie is that they are socialist. And in fact, that's not true either when you actually look at what they do. A lot of the Democrats don't really know that. So that's the second big lie, that Nordic socialism, like the Scandinavian countries, works so well, that's why we need it here. The third big lie is that the rich don't pay their fair share of taxes. We hear this over and over and over again. It's that the rich don't pay their fair share of taxes. That's the third big lie. All of these things I've been hearing most of my life, and now it's having an effect on my generation. And the fourth big lie is that the system is racist. So in order to fix the racism in the system, we have to go more socialist. Those are the 4 big lies we are going to go over in the show today. Now, poor Tom Benson's like, how are we going to fit all this in one show? This is like a college academic course. Yeah. Well, we're going to try to do that here. So I want to start real quick with the first big lie, And that's that the Great Recession was caused by evil Wall Street. In fact, I have a cut up there from Bernie Sanders. Go ahead and go to Sanders Cut 1. I know it's kind of out of order up there, Tom Benson. Were you able to find it, Sanders Cut 1?
Hold on.
We'll go to that and say, because this is something that the left has been able to push over and over again to try to get more government in the economy. Here's Bernie Sanders basically saying that one time when he was doing an interview with PBS. Here it is.
That what we should do is reestablish a modern Glass-Steagall legislation, and what we should do, in fact, is break them up, not only from a risk perspective of not seeing their greed and illegal behavior destroy our economy, as happened 8 years ago, but also from creating a competitive financial system.
So basically what he was calling for there was to break up the big Wall Street banks. And what was his reason there? That their risk caused the recession or the economic collapse a few years ago. And I had talked about earlier this week on PM Orlando, I had watched this CNN documentary on the 2000s. And they did an episode on the financial recession, the financial crisis. And I noticed one big thing was missing there. They did not mention Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac once in that episode. And I was stunned because any book I've read numerous books on the financial crisis, any book I've read, that's the center of the crisis. Now, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are government-sponsored institutions. They run privately, but they're government-sponsored entities, heavily regulated by the government. The government and politicians are very involved. They don't have the same rules. But this is the lie is that it was evil Wall Street, right? Well, I want to give you an example from Thomas Sowell. We just played Thomas Sowell just a second ago. I have his book in front of me, The Housing Boom and Bust. And he talks about this and makes a lot of sense here. Trust me, I'm not going to just read the whole book. We're going to go through this pretty quickly. But this is what he says. He says more than 2/3 of the mortgages made in 2004, for example, were resold to some other financial institution, including Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. These two government-sponsored entities bought more than 1/3 of all the mortgages in the nation that were resold by the original lenders. So Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, government-sponsored institutions that had the implicit government guarantee, bought 1/3 of all mortgages in the country before the crisis. Tell me the government wasn't involved here. He goes on. He says, in order to qualify to sell their mortgages to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, banks must conform to the rules and standards prescribed by these mortgage market giants, including rules and standards that bank must in turn apply to people who seek loans to buy houses. One of the consequences, however, of reselling mortgages on a large scale is that the initial lender has fewer incentives to be meticulous about the financial qualifications of the people whom mortgage loans are made.
Let someone else worry about it. Huh?
Exactly. So what he is talking about there, which makes total sense, is that what was happening is these banks were giving out mortgages to people who couldn't afford them.
Right.
The reason they were doing it is because they were being heavily pressured by the government with lawsuits and regulations, because you had people like Bill Clinton and George W. Bush saying, it's America. The American dream is you must own a home. So we are going to make sure everyone has the opportunity to own a home. Well, they did that through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who were pushing these mortgages out there that were really unsustainable. But the banks didn't care. Now, why didn't the banks care? Because, well, they give out the mortgage and they would just sell them to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
They would make their money through fees and everything else.
Yes.
And wash their hands of the account.
Yeah, so you have Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, remember, government-sponsored entities, heavily regulated by the government, and don't have the same rules as the banks, buying up 1/3 of these bad mortgages. This totally screwed up how the market is supposed to work. If these government-sponsored entities and these politicians didn't push these regulations and push these affordable homes down our throat, this would have never happened. But it did. And the left continues to tell you that it was just evil, greedy Wall Street people that pushed that. Now, there were some evil, greedy Wall Street people. I'm not saying that didn't exist. But to not even mention the fact that you had these government institutions basically heavily involved in the housing market at the center of this Well, it would just be
Beyond reason.
Exactly right. So I just went over the biggest lie, and it's told over and over and over and over again. Occupy Wall Street was founded basically on that premise, that the reason why we had the recession was deregulation and evil Wall Street. No, it was because the market was not allowed to work the way it was supposed to because of government-sponsored entities. Those government-sponsored entities had to be put in full government receivership, totally run by and bailed out by the government, and CNN didn't mention it once in their documentary. That is the first big lie that is now pushing us to socialism. We're going to get to the second, third, and fourth big lie and some other stuff today on Beyond Reason. Maybe I'll end the show on a light note. I really appreciate you all listening to the show. If you want, you can text to 23680 where standard message and data rates apply. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you miss any of the show, you can download the Beyond Reason podcast on iTunes. The voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason is back now.
Oh, welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Beyond Reason Radio, and I am your host, Michael Yaffee. Once again, the voice of reason, the voice of truth in a world that is beyond reason. We're on until 9 p.m. tonight right here on News Radio 93.1 WFLA. If you miss any of the show, catch the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter. You can follow me at PMOWFLA, at PMOWFLA. It's because I have my other show called PM Orlando, which is on WFLA 5 to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. Check the podcast as well. Anywhere podcasts are available. You can check out my interview with Mackenzie Milton, UCF star quarterback, talking about his faith. So we're doing something a little bit different here on Beyond Reason Radio. I like to do this show, like, by the way, because when we do PM Orlando, we go through a lot of we cover a lot of ground in each show, and we go through it very quickly because I want to give you as much information as possible on your drive home. If you're driving home for a half an hour, I want you to be able to get as much as you can get and still get some good commentary. But here on Beyond Reason Radio, we like to get a little bit deeper in the issues because we can. And one of the biggest issues of this week, and really been the past year or so, past couple of years, is the fact that the Democrat Party is going so far to the left and becoming socialist. Now, they say it's democratic socialism, but they are going to the line of socialism. So I'm going over the big lies of that is pushing the party so left, pushing a lot of the country to the left, and big lies of democratic socialism. So if you missed the first part, check the podcast later. I talked about the big lie. Number one big lie is that the financial crisis, the recession, was caused by evil Wall Street people and deregulation and all of that. No, government was heavily involved in that for sure. Well, the second big lie has to do with something Bernie Sanders says all the time. In fact, here's a little bit of Bernie Sanders saying that very thing.
We tell the billionaire class they cannot have it all. For a start, they're going to start paying their fair share of taxes.
Sorry, go ahead and play.
I want to make sure the wealthy pay their fair.
We'll get back to that one there. That is totally my fault, Tom Benson. I'm sorry. Go ahead and play Sanders Cut 3 for me. We're going to get to the other one later in the show. Go ahead and play this one.
When I talk about democratic socialism, I'm not looking at Venezuela. I'm not looking at Cuba. I'm looking at countries like Denmark and Sweden.
All right, so Bernie Sanders says this all the time. He says he wants us to be, he says he's a democratic socialist, and obviously conservatives like, you want us to be like Venezuela, you want us to be like Cuba, you want us to be like the Soviet Union. By the way, Bernie Sanders used to love Cuba and the Soviet Union. I mean,
he went on his honeymoon to Russia.
Yeah, of course. He's defended those regimes in the past. But all of a sudden he's like, no, we're not going to be like them. We're going to be like Sweden and Norway and all these Scandinavian countries, right?
So for the person who gets married for the 7th or 8th time, this time it's going to work. Right?
Yeah, exactly right. Well, here's the first part. There's actually two parts of this big lie. The first part is what a lot of people think about these Scandinavian countries is wrong, including a lot of Democrats. A lot of what Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders or AOC are proposing are much more radical than what you would find in those Scandinavian countries. Now, I happen to find some audio from Terry Miller. He's with the Heritage Foundation. He's also a former ambassador to the UN. He was talking on one of the Heritage Foundation podcasts about the Scandinavian countries and the myth behind a lot of them about socialism and how people really get it wrong when it comes to those countries. This is what he said.
To the idea that the government should spend more money in the United States. You mentioned social safety net. The missing piece of information for most of our listeners would be that the United States already has a huge social safety net. We spend over $1 trillion a year for means-tested welfare programs in the United States. That's more than any other country in the world. We need to look at the basic characteristics of these Nordic societies. We look at them very carefully in our annual Index of Economic Freedom that we produce here at the Heritage Foundation. And all of the Nordic countries do very well in our index. In fact, several of them score more highly than the United States in terms of economic freedom. They're characterized by very great respect for the rule of law. They have very low levels of corruption. They have great regulatory systems for their economy. They regulate with a very light touch, doing the minimum possible to ensure health and safety and preservation of the environment. And they also are hugely open to trade and investment flows from around the world. There's almost a complete absence of protectionism in these countries. The one area where they don't do as well is in tax and spending.
Right.
Where they have higher levels of taxation and higher levels of spending than we do in the United States.
So what did he talk about there? What isn't really well known by a lot of Democrats in this country is a lot of these Scandinavian countries, they have very light regulation in their markets. So like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, they love government regulation. They love the government getting involved. You just heard Bernie Sanders in the last segment talk about breaking up Wall Street. They love these big government regulation things. Well, in the Scandinavian countries like Norway, in Denmark, they don't. In fact, some of those countries are more free than we are. Bernie Sanders won't tell you that.
Because he wants control.
Yeah, of course he wants control. And this is my point. The big lie is that what he is proposing is just all like those countries. It's not. It's much more radical than those countries. But he also brought up there that where they have big government in those countries is a lot of these welfare programs. And for one, he points out the U.S. still spends a whole lot of money on welfare stuff, and it isn't working. It's never enough, as I point to you. But he also talks about there how they have higher taxes than we do. And that brings up the other lie I want to bring you. One thing that a lot of people tell me when it talks about democratic socialism, we need single-payer medicine. We need universal health care, Medicare for all, because it's so great in those other countries, so we need it here. Well, the fact is it's not great in those other countries. The fact is actually a lot of those countries are moving away from it because it's been a complete disaster in a lot of situations. It's not the utopia you think it is. Just look at Britain right now. Britain's having major problems in their national health care system because they have to ration care because it's never enough money. Well, I'm reading from a book. I know I'm bringing out another book here. What in the world am I doing? There's a book called The Problem with Socialism by Thomas D. Lorenzo. I know, Tom Benson. Poor Tom Benson looking at me with these books. This is the last book I'll bring out, okay?
You don't dare bring these books when you go out on a date with your friend, do you?
This is what we do on our dates, Tom Benson.
Oh,
you
boy.
didn't know? So this is what he says in the book. He says, European countries with socialized medicine are moving away from it by introducing market-oriented reforms that introduce a larger degree of private sector competition in healthcare industries. In England, more than 7 million people had private health insurance, and the British National Health Service is treating patients in private hospitals. Bet you didn't know that. There is now almost as much private sector healthcare in Australia as in the United States as a percentage of all healthcare. Sweden allows private healthcare providers to supply almost half of all the healthcare services and allows private health insurance. And the Canadian government spends more than $1 billion per year on healthcare services for Canadians delivered by American healthcare providers. Thousands of Canadians essentially take healthcare privatization into their own hands each year by traveling to the United States. So you have a lot of these socialist countries moving away from it, and yet you have people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris and AOC who want us to move towards it. But it's even worse than that. Let's look at what goes on in Canada. Government rationing of medical technology is pervasive in countries with single payer like Canada. On a per capita basis, the United States has more than 3 times as many MRI units as Canada does, twice as many CT scanners, and much of the medical technology that does exist in Canada is archaic and obsolete compared to American medical technology. There's a whole chapter in this book. I would definitely recommend people read it, but this is the whole thing. It's a lie to suggest that it's some utopia there and everybody loves their so-called free national healthcare system. Well, for one, it's not free. A lot of those countries require co-pays. Plus, you have way higher taxes. Plus, in a lot of those countries, you have to buy supplemental private insurance on top of it. So that's the other big lie. I just talked to someone who's over there, like Simon, who used to fill in for Bud all the time. He talks about it, how he had major problems. He believes it killed his father, believe it or not. So that's the second big lie, that we need to be more like the European socialist countries. One, in some ways they're freer than us, and two, it's not the utopia you think it is. We'll get to the third big lie next and much more. I know, it's just beyond reason we're going through all this information, but I really wanted to get this out there. Larry Kudlow challenged me, so that's what I'm doing. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
It would be beyond reason not to listen to Yaffee on your TuneIn Radio app. Download the app today and search Beyond Reason Radio. This is Orlando's Smart Talk Radio. Beyond Reason Radio continues now.
Oh, welcome back to the show. This is Beyond Reason Radio, and as you heard, the voice there said it is Orlando's Smart Talk Radio. We're on until 9 p.m. tonight right here on News Radio 93.1 WFLA, still on AM 540 as well. You can get us on the iHeartRadio app. And if you miss any of the show, make sure to check out the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. As I talked about before, Larry Kudlow said we need to convict socialism and win the argument against it. So that's what we're trying to do today, because it's become such a big issue. I mean, this whole thing, which I talked about on the show, on the earlier show, PM Orlando, with Ilhan Omar, just an example of how radically left the Democrat Party has become. And those like AOC seem to be almost in control of the party. And then you look at Bernie Sanders, who's running for president. He's second in the polls for Democrats behind Joe Biden. He's a democratic socialist. That would have been radical in the Democrat Party just 10 years ago. And now it seems to be mainstream. So I asked myself, why is this? Why is the Democrat Party going so left? And why is their message successful for a lot of Americans? Well, it's because they promote a lot of big lies dealing with our American economy. And I've heard them most of my life. The first big lie, that the recession was caused by deregulation on Wall Street? No. Second big lie was that democratic socialism works well in the Scandinavian countries. Well, one, they're not as socialist as us in some ways, and two, no, it doesn't work well. That's why they're going away from it. Now to the third big lie, and this one is definitely a big one because we hear it all the time, and this is not just by Bernie Sanders, it's by other people like Hillary Clinton. You heard it a lot just a few years ago. Here it is.
We tell the billionaire class they cannot have it all. For a start, they're going to start paying their fair share of taxes.
I want to make sure the wealthy pay their fair share.
Wealthy and the large corporations will start paying their fair share of taxes.
The money is at the top, and that's where we need to be shifting our tax system. I want to impose what I call a fair share surcharge on incomes of $5 million or more.
Well, corporate America, bad news. Change is coming. You're going to have to start paying your fair share of taxes.
The first thing we're going to do is make sure the tax system makes the wealthy pay their fair share.
All right, so we hear it over and over and over again. Well, the wealthy are not paying their fair of taxes. They need to pay more, and we need to redistribute that to everyone else. So let's look at it. Are the wealthy paying their fair share? Well, when you go back in history, let's see, in 1945, let's just look at it this way. 1945, there was just a small percentage of people that were having to pay income taxes. Fast forward to 1960, 16% of those filing tax returns had no income tax liability. So 16% of people, that was it, didn't have to pay any income tax. Go up to 2000, year 2000, 25.2% had to pay pretty much no income tax. So it's gone up. Then you go to 2009, that number peaked at 42%. 2010, it went down to 41%. So you go over the years, it seems less people on the bottom have had to pay taxes, not more. But what about the rich? The rich aren't paying their fair share of taxes, right? Well, that's not true. Let's look at 2013. The top 1% paid over 37% of the income taxes, but just made 20% of the nation's income. The top 5% paid more than 58% of the income taxes. So the top 10%, or the top 1% paid 37%, but they only made 20%. So it sounds to me, isn't that more than their fair share? Isn't that more than what we're being told? See, this is the other big lie. Let's look at the latest data from the IRS, even beyond 2013. It says the top 1% of income earners paid 39.5% of all federal income taxes, nearly twice the 20.6% share of the national income they earn. So they pay twice as much as they earn, but they're not paying their fair share. They need to pay more. This is such a lie. By the way, the entire bottom 50% of all taxpayers pay 2.7% of federal income taxes, which is only a small fraction of about the 1/4 of their share of national income. So the bottom 50% has 1/4 of the national income, but only pay 2% of all the income taxes. Tell me what is not fair here. This is the lie. That's the third big lie. By the way, one of the reasons I brought that up is because AOC's mom, did you hear the story, Tom Menton? AOC's mom.
I did hear this.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's mom, she decided to move down here to Florida.
And the reason is because
too high taxes.
Oh.
Yeah, she was charging too much. She said it was ridiculous. She was going to work 2 jobs and couldn't afford her taxes.
Surprise, surprise. She was paying, what, $100,000 in property taxes up in New York. And now she's paying less than $1,000.
It's unbelievable. What's really funny about that, though, is we talked about it on the morning show. And we had this texter, this leftist texter who was just bought into the leftist Kool-Aid, and she texts all the time. Mm-hmm. Texted in and said, well, that's because the rich in New York are not paying their fair share.
Oh, of course.
Because if they were paying their fair share,
she wouldn't have.
She wouldn't have to. This is the lie we hear. Well, let's look at the stats, which I found in front of me right now. New York City's 1% collectively earned over $100 billion in 2013, paid 47% of the income taxes in 2013. That's what the data shows.
Mm-hmm.
Investors Business Daily, the IBO, found that the top 1% earned about $107.5 billion. That's 38% of the entire city's population income. So they earned about 38% of the income, but paid 47% of the taxes. Wait a minute. She said that they're not paying their fair share, and that's why everyone else has to pay more taxes. But isn't 47 more than 38?
Well, not in the new math. Not in the
the Common Core math.
Common Core math, right?
Maybe that's what explains it. So it's just a lie. You can't go down that road that the rich aren't paying their fair share when you actually look at the stats. But it's class warfare, and people buy it up. buy into it because, they want the free government stuff. By the way, to pay for things like the Green New Deal, which they said would cost $93 trillion, you would have to raise taxes on everyone. For Medicare for all, you're going to have to raise taxes on everyone. At least be honest about it, because that's what they have to do in the Scandinavian countries. They raise taxes on everyone, not just the rich. So at least they should be honest about it. Okay, last big lie here, Tom Benson. The fourth big lie of democratic socialism and why so many people are convinced that they should go more left and the Democratic Party should go more left. It's basically the idea that this country is racist, that the social justice movement has convinced people that the system is racist, is sexist, is bigoted, is homophobic, and all of that. And they push forward this narrative that we have to have more government control over our lives, that we have to have more income redistribution, that we have to go more socialist because that's the way we can get rid of all of that. Well, Thomas Sowell, who actually is black, by the way, he used to be a Marxist when he was young and then got rid of it. He said, I had to go away from them because of facts. That's what he says. He actually has a new book out called Discrimination and Disparities, which I read. You would have to really goes over all these stats. But he was also on Fox Business earlier this week, and he brought up an excellent point on how that is totally a lie. This is what he said.
Well, this is one of any number of one-factor explanations as to why everyone doesn't have the same outcome. 100 years ago, it was genetics. At other times and places, it was exploitation. But again, these are ideas that sound plausible. But when you do research, you discover that everywhere you turn, there are 1,000 reasons why people don't turn out the same. It goes right down to the family. In the first chapter of this book, I point out that the firstborn has higher IQs than his siblings. And in later life has more achievements. Among astronauts, for example, of the 29 astronauts in the Apollo program that put a man on the moon, 22 were either the firstborn or an only child. Now, if you can't get equality among people born to the same parents and raised under the same roof, why in the world would you think you're going to get it among people who've had such different histories and cultures around the world?
I mean, it's just common sense there. He talks about in the family there's disparities, and there's going to be disparities in life. And he goes over so many different facts that we think it's really discrimination, but it's not. There's different reasons why. For instance, one example he brings up is there's a lot of Democrats who think that you shouldn't have to do a background check to see if someone is a convicted felon or something because it's racist because more blacks ended up being convicted felons. So they passed these laws that you can no longer look at that. So what happens? People who would usually hire a black person who passed a background check is going to be more reluctant to hire a black person. Now, why is that? Because statistically, blacks have a higher chance of going to jail right now because that's the way it is. Statistically, more blacks end up in jail. So this ended up hurting the good blacks who would pass background checks.
So it's like de facto after the fact discrimination.
And it's just it's a type, they don't even realize they're doing it, and they pass these laws that think actually help like the black community, and it actually makes it worse.
In reality, better safe than sorry.
Yeah, so you have a lot of good blacks who are out there who could pass a background check and get the job and do well that don't because of all these laws that we keep putting into effect. And he has example after example. For instance, blacks used to have basically the same unemployment numbers as whites before the minimum wage. Mm-hmm. Before the minimum wage was passed in this country, and most of the minimum wage laws were passed in this country, blacks were pretty much right around where everyone else was when it came to unemployment. Soon as the minimum wage laws were passed, black unemployment has started to go up, and it's been up and up and up ever since, except, under Trump, it's finally actually come down quite a bit. So there's all these different examples, and everyone says, well, it's systematic racism, but it's really not. There are other reasons why this goes on. So the other big lie is that it's just we're a racist country, which is not true. I'd encourage you to read that book by Thomas Sowell, Discrimination and Disparities. We'll end the show. It's a little bit a Beyond Reason show, but we'll end the show on a lighter note. Things that made Yaffee Laffee. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Download the iHeart Radio app and catch the Beyond Reason Radio podcast.
My best friend gave me the best advice. He said each day's a gift and not a given right. Leave no stone.
The conscience in your ear telling you the difference between right and wrong. Yaffee is back on the air.
I forgot about this song. I actually really like this song. So, you might be wondering why we're playing Nickelback right now. Well, it has to do with ending the show on a little bit of a lighter note here. Things that make Yaffee Laffee. So apparently, there was a debate on the House floor between a Republican and a Democrat. You know, as usual. But this debate was a little bit different. According to Fox News here, House Republicans and Democrats have found one more thing to disagree on. Canadian rock band Nickelback. That's right, Representatives Randy Davis and Mark Pocan were debating a criminal justice amendment to end the practice of prison gerrymandering and all that. And then all of a sudden he said, that's probably about the percent of people who think Nickelback is their favorite band in this country. It's pretty low. Poor Nickelback. People love to hate Nickelback. I like them. They have some really good songs. They kind of went more pop and less rock as they went along. But I like the song you just played. That's a great song. I'm going to put that back on my playlist, by the way. And it says, and I think if you look at Nickelback's your favorite band, because another congressman set up, he said, Nickelback's your favorite band? Oh, I apologize to the gentleman. And then Davis, who spoke against the amendment, playfully shot back, why would you criticize one of the greatest bands of the 90s? Then he said, admitting to having a Nickelback song on his running playlist. And then Pocan said, one more reason there's a difference between Democrats and Republicans clearly found on the floor of Congress today. So which is, by the way, Nickelback was not really a big band in the 90s. They were a big band in the 2000s. So I have to correct him on that. Because I was in high school in the 2000s. That's when Nickelback really came up. But I thought that was pretty fun. That was a good song you were playing.
Well, thank you.
I like that Nickelback song. Nickelback's got some good stuff. Some of their stuff is pretty weird. All right, so something else real quick that made me laughy. According to our good friends at the Babylon Bee, even though it's satire, it could very well be true. Here's the story. It says, Ilhan Omar withdraws support from bill to save the earth after learning that's where Israel is. Oh, she hit a snag for a Green New Deal. She was an enthusiastic supporter for it. But I thought weather like storms and earthquakes were all caused by climate change. But now I've learned from Representative Omar that a lot of that is actually caused by Jewish-controlled weather machines. And then she's upset because, wait a minute. That's where they are. That's where the Jews are. They're on Earth. Well, we can't protect the Earth. That's where Israel is. Oh, man. This has been a great show. I really appreciate you listening to Beyond Reason Radio. If you missed any of the show, catch out the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. By the way, if you missed PM Orlando earlier, catch the podcast of that as well. Anywhere podcasts are available. Search for either one. Follow me on Twitter. Send me a friend request on Facebook. And we'll have a good weekend. I'll see you guys next time.